in any decision making process, the first thing is to understand the types of decisions. Welcome once again to the very first learning session for decision making for product managers. And over the next couple of weeks, I'm very excited to go on this learning journey with all of you. The first thing is to understand the types of decisions. Each decision will be classified either as reversible or irreversible, and whether it has a consequential impact or an inconsequential impact. So if you look at consequential and irreversible, right? The key here is you act as late as possible, right? You've heard ASAP so many times, and I'm introducing ALAP. That framework basically talks about the fact that you should act when you have stopped gathering any new evidence which can impactfully change your decision, right? That's one. Or you should act when you have lost an opportunity, right? An opportunity cost is kicking in, so which is a flop. So make that your mantra if you are actually dealing with kind of bigger decisions which are consequential and which are irreversible. Act as late as possible. On the other hand side, right, reversible and inconsequential, act as soon as possible, right? So that's the key difference here. The other thing is kind of who is kind of really focused, who is really focusing on this decision making, right? As you kind of like in any organization, right? Like each person is making a decision. The CEO is perhaps making a decision at kind of larger organization level, right? And the things that the CEO is perhaps thinking about are mostly in the consequential and irreversible bracket, okay? Versus someone who is at the very junior level is perhaps operating more in the reversible and inconsequential bracket. And as you move up your ladder in product, right, you will be moving across these different quadrants. You will be moving from reversible inconsequential decision making to kind of reversible and consequential, and then irreversible consequential finally, right? If you are kind of a product leader who is kind of having direct product reports, etc., delegate the decision which is irreversible and inconsequential to the person who's most affected by this decision. Which means like if someone is running an A/B experiment, a product manager is running an A/B experiment, you don't want the CEO to make that decision ideally, right? It should be the product manager who is running that experiment, because at the end of the day, he or she is the one who is most affected by it, right? So that's the other thing to keep in mind. The third thing to keep in mind is that your tolerance for mistakes is going to vary, right? Which means like the moment you're looking at irreversible and inconsequential pieces, or reversible and kind of inconsequential pieces, you are going to have to allow for mistakes because you are kind of also learning in the process, versus very big decisions, right? You will need to kind of make sure that the chances of that going wrong are reduced. So you're going to kind of focus a lot on mitigating the negative consequences that might be there. Now, the focus here is going to be a lot more on consequential and irreversible decisions, right? And because that's the hardest one to kind of crack. And we'll go deeper into how do you go about it. You can apply the same process to other decision-making quadrants as well, but it's largely kind of very, very helpful in kind of addressing the consequential and irreversible decisions that you'll be making. So this is what we call as the type 1 decisions. So we'll focus a lot more on type 1 decisions and how to go about it. So how do you actually say that the decision has consequence? The reach, impact, risk, and cost. People, is it impacting? What is the kind of impact? What is the business risk overall that can kind of ensue because of us taking this decision or not taking this decision in this particular direction? And finally, what's the cost, right? Let's say Ola today, Ola kind of this week announced the foray into grocery delivery, right? It's a very big decision if you think about it, right? For a mobility company to venture into kind of grocery delivery is a very different take on it, right? With so many other e-commerce marketplaces also going after the same one. Now, if you think about that particular construct here, it has kind of risks also associated with the brand, right? Because if it tanks, okay, the brand of Ola also takes a hit, right? So that's where kind of the risk and the cost part is very, very kind of huge here, right? Similarly, let's take a security risk that we talked about, okay? Well, the security risk, and we've seen so many kind of companies, right, from Facebook, etc., like the data getting leaked. Those are brand risks as well, right? And that also has a brand equity cost, which is perhaps you cannot measure it in tangible forms, but it kind of indirectly leads to kind of customer loss and things like that. It can also be looked at in terms of opportunity cost, right? For example, if you are investing this much of effort and bandwidth from your team in this direction, what else could you have actually kind of put that effort in? Because once you have invested that effort, it's sunk cost. You cannot recover it, right? So that's kind of the cost element also coming into it. So cost can have different elements as well. It can be direct monetary cost. For example, you're pumping in ad dollars, it does not take off, and that's kind of sunk cost there. Or it can also be the human capital cost, right? Because you are investing time there and it does not kind of, could have been invested elsewhere. These are the different pieces to think about when you're thinking about consequences: reach, impact, risk, and cost. Thank you so much. Do let us know how you found today's session, and we'll kind of continue doing the same thing across all the sessions. For the entire decision-making process, if you have to remember two things, right? These are the two things to remember always.